Hello again, fourth grade, and welcome to lesson 8-5. In this lesson, we're going to work on using what we call benchmarks and benchmark fractions to be able to compare fractions with each other. Now, benchmark fractions are the most easy to imagine fractions, like 1/2. You can picture 1/2 in your mind, or 1/4, or 1/3, or 3/4, or 2/3. Those are all fractions that are considered benchmark fractions because they're easy for you to visualize and imagine them in your head. So when you're doing any kind of comparison, you're comparing any fractions to each other, it's helpful to use benchmarks sometimes because you can decide if something is bigger than or smaller than a particular benchmark, and that'll help you decide if those fractions are bigger than or smaller than each other. So let's go ahead and watch our short video lesson, and then we're going to get into more details in our notes and our guided practice.
How can you use benchmarks to compare fractions? Think about this question during the lesson. Robert needs 3/8 stick of butter to make muffins and 2/3 stick of butter to make cookies. Which recipe uses more butter? You need to compare 3/8 and 2/3. Are the holes the same size?
So stop and think. Over here, are the holes the same size? So the whole shape or the whole stick of butter, is it the same size? The whole is going to be the same. It's just cut into different size pieces. So it's either got bigger size pieces or it's got smaller size pieces, but your stick of butter is the same stick of butter no matter how many pieces you cut it into.
Yes, you can compare these fractions because they refer to the same whole, a stick of butter. You can use benchmark fractions to compare fractions. Benchmark fractions are commonly used fractions such as 1/4, 1/3, 1/2, 2/3, and 3/4. Compare 3/8 to the benchmark fraction 1/2. When you draw area models to compare fractions, you must be sure to use the same size whole for the two fractions.
Drag the fraction models to the mat to compare 1/2 and 3/8.
Okay, so here we're going to take a look at 1/2 and 3/8. So 1/2 is one that's broken up into two pieces, a whole that's broken up into two pieces. And 3/8 is one whole that's broken up into 8 pieces with 3 of those pieces colored in. So let's try and line these up properly. So this is how much 1/2 is, and this is how much 3/8 is. So you can see it's a little bit less than 1/2.
How can you tell that 3/8 is less than 1/2? A smaller part of the whole is shaded for 3/8 than for 1/2. So 3/8 is less than 1/2. To which benchmark fraction should you compare 2/3?
Select your answer.
Compare 2/3 to the benchmark fraction 1/2. You need to compare 3/8 and 2/3 to the same benchmark fraction. Since 3/8 was compared to 1/2, 2/3 should be compared to 1/2 as well. 2/3 is greater than 1/2.
Now you've compared both fractions to the same benchmark.
3/8 is less than 1/2 and 2/3 is greater than 1/2. So 3/8 is less than 2/3.
Okay, so stop and take a look at this for a moment. So our benchmark fraction is 1/2. So if we're going to use benchmarks for comparing, we need to compare both the numbers that we're working with to the same benchmark. So if we're going to use 1/2 to decide, we're going to see is one of our numbers greater or less than 1/2, and then we're going to see our other number, is that one greater or less than 1/2.
The cookie recipe uses more butter than the muffin recipe. Now you know how to use benchmarks to compare fractions.
All right, let's go ahead and get into our notes guided practice. Now, when we're talking about using benchmark fractions to compare, you need to stop and think, how can you use benchmark fractions to compare fractions? Well, first, you need to know what benchmark fractions are. Now, we know benchmark fractions are commonly used fractions that are easy to use and visualize. They're easy for you to imagine what they look like. So our benchmark fractions are 1/4, 1/3, 1/2, 2/3, and 3/4. So here's a shape broken up into fourths, that same shape broken into thirds, that same shape broken into halves. So 1/4 is just this much, 3/4 would be 3 of these pieces, 1/3, 2/3, and then 1/2. So we can see 1/3 is less than 1/2, but 2/3 is greater than 1/2. 1/4 is less than 1/2, but 3/4 is greater than 1/2. So let's look at an example over here. Compare 2/3 and 3/4 below. Which is greater? Use the benchmark fraction strips to compare. So I drew what one whole looks like up here. And then I drew one that was broken into thirds and one that was broken into fourths. So if you get in here and you look close up, you can see that 1/3 is less than 3/4. There's less area shaded. You can see the 1/4 goes out this far, and that's farther than the 2/3 went out. So 3/4 is greater than 2/3. Let's take a look at another example together. Okay, so we're going to compare 9/10 and 7/6. So remember, your whole is the same size. All you're doing is figuring out the pieces that you've got. Are they equal to each other? Are they greater than or less than? You're going to do the comparison. So stop and think. 9/10 is less than one whole because the numerator is less than the denominator. 9 is less than 10. 7/6 is greater than one whole because the numerator is greater than the denominator, because the 7 over here is bigger than the 6. That means it's more than one whole. Now, if I want to draw it out using benchmark fractions or using a fraction strip, I drew out my one whole over here on top. I drew out 9/10, so my one whole broken up into 10 parts, and I colored in 9 of the parts. And then I drew out 7/6. So there's my 6/6 that makes the one whole plus the one extra 6 on the side. Now here we can, just by looking at this, it's very easy for us to see that 7/6 is greater than 9/10. You notice that by looking at the fractions that we drew, the fraction strips that we drew, you also notice it by realizing that the denominator here is larger than, or sorry, the numerator here is larger than the denominator, but it's not in this case. So you can tell right away from looking at these different clues that will help you to find your answer quickly and correctly. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at your guided practice. Now we've got a lot of information here that we're covering in our guided practice. All right, Carl found 4/8 is equal to 1/2 and 1/3 is less than 1/2. How can Carl compare 4/8 to 1/3? So he's using the benchmark here, 1/2, as his comparison. So 4/8 is equal to 1/2. And 1/3 is less than 1/2. So that means 1/3 is going to be less than 4/8 because 1/2 is equal to 4/8. Since 1/3 is less than 1/2, then 1/3 is also less than 4/8. For number 2, it says write a fraction that is closer to 0 than to 1, and then write another fraction that is closer to 1 than it is to 0. Use your fractions to complete the comparison. So stop and think. A fraction that is closer to 0 needs to be smaller than 1/2. Has less than half the pieces, so it's closer to 0 than it is to 1. And a fraction that's closer to 1 needs to have 1/2 or more, greater than 1/2 usually, to be closer to 1. So I picked any two fractions. I picked 1/10, which is closer to 0, because if I have a shape that's broken up into 10 pieces and I only have one of those pieces, that's very, very little. And my other fraction that I chose was 6/7. If I have 7 pieces altogether, if there are 7 pieces altogether and I have 6 of those pieces, I have almost the whole thing. So this shows that 1/10 is less than 6/7 because this is closer to 0 and this is closer to 1. For number 3, they're asking you to compare 2/6 and 4/5. So we know that 2/6 is less than half. I'm going to use the 1/2 as my benchmark here. 2/6 is less than half, and 4/5 is more than half. So that means 2/6 is less than 4/5. Use your benchmark fractions. They're very helpful. I'm going to pull up a fraction strip for you guys in a minute and show you as well. Now for number 4, it says 11/12 and 9/8. We need to compare those. Now, when you look at this, the first thing you need to notice is that 11/12 is less than 1 whole, but 9/8 is greater than 1 whole. That means you have all 8 pieces plus 1 extra piece. It's like having a whole pizza that's cut into 8 pieces plus a slice from another box of pizza. So right away, we know that 9/8 is greater than 11/12, or you can read it as 11/12 is less than 9/8. Now for number 5, it says circle the fractions that are less than 1/2. So 5/4 is greater than 1 whole. That's definitely greater than 1/2. 1/4 is less than 1/2. 1/5 is less than 1/2. 2/3 we know is going to be greater than 1/2. 2/12 is less than 1/2. And then 51/100 is just barely greater than 1/2. So you need to check. The way you can check is you can see if your top number is half of your bottom number. For the next one, for number 6, it says circle the fractions that are greater than 1, like 1 whole. So that means your numerator needs to be larger than your denominator. Here, it's not larger. Here, 6/5. 6 is larger than 5, so that one is greater than 1 whole. 7/8 is not 1 whole yet. 14/8 is more than 1 whole. 11/10 is more than 1 whole, but 11/12 is not 1 whole. Remember, a fraction is greater than 1 when the numerator is bigger than the denominator. As soon as you see that, you know right away that the fraction that you're working with is greater than 1. So make sure you do your work really carefully. Use your benchmarks to help you understand how to do things. I'm also going to be uploading a benchmark fraction strip for you guys to be able to see what I'm talking about. And I'm going to show you what one of them looks like right now. I'm going to be uploading 2. So one of them looks like this. If you take a look at it, you can see the equivalent fractions in here. You can see right away that which ones are equal to each other, smaller than, greater than, and it's in color, which is really nice. So that means you guys are able to line things up and compare your fractions really easily. Another thing I will be sharing with you guys will be kind of a full page PDF one that you guys can print out. There will be a color one, and there will also be a black and white one so that you guys are able to print it at home if you like. And it'll also have one that you'll be able to fill out if you would like to fill one out for practice. That's it for this lesson for 8-5. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you guys have an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye.